Welcome to Living Mirrors with Dr. James Cook. My guest this week is Michelle Baker-Jones. Michelle is an integrative psychotherapeutic counsellor in private practice and is also a lead therapist at Imperial College's Psychedelic research team, where she's worked on studies exploring the therapeutic potential of psilocybin for depression. She also co-facilitates a monthly psychedelic integration group based in London and offers individual integration sessions for people who are studying to process their psychedelic experiences. Today we speak about her research into using psilocybin as a treatment for depression and related issues in psychedelic psychotherapy. Hope you enjoy the conversation. Okay, I'm here with Michelle Baker-Jones. Michelle, thanks for coming on the podcast.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you're a part of the psychedelic research team at Imperial College London. Perhaps we can start with a bit about the kind of research that you're currently working on and your role in the team.
Yes, so we've just recently finished Psychedelic 2, which was a kind of mechanism trial comparing a standard antidepressant to psilocybin. So it was a randomized control trial. So one arm of the participants would get 2 high doses of psilocybin plus placebo, and the other arm would get a very small dose of psilocybin plus escitalopram. And it was basically a direct comparison with brain imaging and brain scans afterwards to see what the difference was in terms of shifting depression. I worked also on Psychedelic 1, which was just really a trial looking at the efficacy of psilocybin to treat depression.
Right, without the brain imaging in Psychedelic 1, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so if we look into kind of the origins of this, for anyone who's not kind of up to speed, would you say that the studies at Johns Hopkins first looking at psilocybin, being the active compound in magic mushrooms, looking at that for end-of-life anxiety and depression, is that where the signal was first detected that these might be a kind of novel treatment for depression?
Well, I suppose that the signal was way back in the 50s and 60s, where a lot of therapeutic work first happened. It was really only the legal guillotine of psychedelics being rescheduled that stopped all that work, that body of work continuing. So in a way, we're just kind of picking up from where they left off, trying to demonstrate that psychedelics are have therapeutic potential, and in order to do that we need to do the trials so that it can be rescheduled, and then the potential for mental health uses will hopefully then unfold.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess the original signal anecdotally was in the indigenous use, a long time ago. But then, So with Psychedelic 1, I guess the aim was within the kind of Western medical model to do a kind of controlled experiment, right, to prove that this is a powerful kind of therapeutic modality for depression. And can you maybe tell us a bit about what the first trial found?
Yes, so we were treating people with treatment-resistant depression. So it meant that they would have tried therapy, antidepressants, lots of they would have, and they would have had depression from 10 to 20 years. So basically, all other forms of therapy had really failed them. And what we found is that. I think there was maybe one non-responder, but on the whole, it shifted people's depression quite considerably up to the 6-week mark, and for some people on to 6 months. And then after 6 months, some people's depression would come back. So, I mean, that's hugely transformative in and of itself. But I suppose, which is why the second trial has 2 doses to see what's the sweet spot, how many doses does a person need to really do the work and shift their depression. And I'm not sure. I think 1 dose or 2 doses can be hugely transformative for some individuals, but for other people they may need consecutive doses. But I suppose it's a different model of mental health. It's one where you take a drug occasionally rather than every day.
Right, and yeah, for some people, as you say, one session can be enough, right, to kind of address these issues. And it seems a kind of fundamentally different model, because instead of potentially trying to soothe or suppress symptoms with an antidepressant, you're kind of, is it right, would you say that people are tending to kind of move towards healing whatever the kind of underlying issues are, rather than just looking at the symptom level?
Yes, completely. So it's about fostering a curiosity towards people's internal intrapsychic worlds, and going to the roots of the depression rather than managing symptoms. And I suppose that's the difference in terms of paradigm.
Right. And so with psilocybin 2, you mentioned were the main difference is experimenting with 2 doses as opposed to 1, and also the brain imaging?
And I suppose it was a direct comparison with an SSRI or an antidepressant. So to kind of pitch them, even though I suppose, traditionally you normally get the antidepressant, but not necessarily the therapy. So it wasn't a completely even playing field, but it was to pitch them against each other and to see which was more effective. I suppose that was the idea of the trial largely.
And now that it's wrapped up, is it something you can talk about now, what you found, or do you have to wait for the publications to come out?
Yeah, the publications and the results are in the pipeline, but I think it on the whole, it looks pretty good for psilocybin. Yeah, that's all I can say.
Yeah. Great. I mean, I think for people who work in this area, I think I've got the impression for a lot of people, it's getting these papers out is kind of just putting numbers to what is already known, kind of perhaps like if you're in the room with people undergoing these experiences, the healing seems kind of profound, but of course science isn't anecdotal. You can't just say, trust me, I've seen it, it's great. So maybe it's not a surprise to me that you're saying there's no controversial results coming out, I guess, here.
Yeah, no, I don't. Yeah, I mean that maybe the one thing that will be interesting is that people on escitalopram will maybe have done okay as well too, but I suppose that's mitigated by the care and the experience they've had that they wouldn't normally get, from the doctor. So even though they're taking escitalopram, they're getting a lot of our time and energy and efforts. So there's something about the level of care as well, which we're delivering. So maybe that's no great surprise to some degree, but yeah, it's interesting that placebo or low dose experiences can be equally quite powerful.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Not as powerful as psilocybin. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it definitely, you're not setting a low bar for yourself, it seems, right? It's not like you're just giving people antidepressants and saying, go home, versus I guess the confound with psilocybin is they're also receiving attention and care, as you say. So it's good that
completely
the signal will be a fair test.
Yeah.
And so maybe we could go into what an actual kind of session looks like, how, because your role is as a kind of a lead therapist, right, in these sessions, actually kind of guiding people through them.
Yeah. So the day before, the participant will come and have lunch with us. Well, no, they will have a brain scan in the morning, and lots of bloods and tests and questions. All the science stuff will be asked, but not by me. And then they will have lunch with me and the co-guide. And then we will talk about their intentions for the experience. We encourage them sometimes to bring in objects to symbolize their intentions. We talk about taboo subjects, what's the worst thing that you think might happen, what's their relationship to death, to sex, to those kind of things, so that all those things are out in the open, rather than they're kind of sitting there feeling, this intense thing is happening and I can't share it. So in a way, it's just about building the trust and building the rapport. And then we talk about a little bit about what to expect, from the experience. And a lot of it is really about fostering an attitude of curiosity and bravery, so that we're encouraging the person to go into their pain, to not avoid it. So, depending on what kind of experience they have, it's like whatever arises is useful and interesting. Just be curious about it. And if it's nothing's happening or you're stuck, then stay with that, and explore that. It's all grist for the mill, as it were. So we kind of do a lot of preparing of what to expect. And then we do a prep visualization, which Ros Watts has written as part of her ACE therapy model. And that's so the participant will lie on the bed, and we'll have a sense then of what it's like to have the two guides next to them. And I will read a very lengthy visualization, which is all about sort of going into your body, feeling the tensions in your body, staying with those tensions, seeing if they shift or if there's anything happening there, or what feelings can be associated with those tensions. And the analogy is very much diving for, so you may have these beautiful experiences, which, you know, the psychedelics can happen in psychedelics, but also there might be a darker, murkier, mistier part of the psychedelic, where we use the analogy of diving for spiky oyster shells. So, you know, it's being curious about them, prizing them open, and which is a bit like the analogy of your pain, staying with your pain to see what you might find. And if you prize open an oyster shell, you might get a pearl, and the pearl can be, you know, that insight or that wisdom that they gain from the experience. So that prep visualization, I think, helps them have a sense of, I suppose, diving into their internal world, diving into their psyche, noticing what's happening in their body, going towards their pain or whatever experience happens. I suppose it's fostering surrender and trust, really, and kind of feeling what it's like to have us by their side, looking after them. So after that, then they come back the next day, relatively early. We encourage them to have quite a light breakfast, and by about, we check in with them, see how they're doing. You know, they might be quite nervous. We have some art books to look at to kind of try and take them away from their mind and kind of just kind of into art. And then once they're ready, we give them the psilocybin capsules, so 5 capsules, because they have to be synthesized, and then encourage them to put them as the experience happens. So kind of anchoring them and hopefully helping them to feel safe. And then we kind of sit back, and, you know, once they pull their hands away, and we check in with them, say every 40 minutes, unless they look distressed, although they're having a difficult time. You know, we just ask them to let us know what's happening, and maybe we can breathe with them, or we can kind of, you know, if they need to talk to us, then they can do that. But we very much try to foster this internal experience for them, and we're like their cabin crew. We're there to make them feel comfortable and to feel safe. But if they feel like, you know, they need us, then we can be alongside them and, you know, give them water or whatever it is they need. And then I suppose after about 2 or 3 hours, the psilocybin will wear off, and they may come out and want to share a little bit with us. But often we encourage them to go back in, and because on the descent, you know, it can be useful as well to keep working with the medicine, and think, sure, if you want to speak to us, you can, but it might be really useful to just, you know, take what you've got there and go back in with it and see where it takes you. And then yeah, so then they often stay over the night at the research facility. We have some rooms across the road, and then the next day we'll come in and we'll spend an hour and a half with them, 2 hours, sort of talking about the experience, kind of giving them the space to download, and trying to keep it as open as possible, so that you know, the meanings aren't settled on too quickly. It's just sort of creating that space for them to talk about their experience. And then we will check in with them like a week after, just to see how they're doing as well.
And then your role as the guide, then, it sounds, is it's, even though it might be called psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, it's a rather kind of supportive rather than active guiding through the experience. Is that right?
Yeah, it's definitely trying to stand out of the way. Yeah, and letting the medicine and the person, hopefully, you know, we talk about them finding their inner healer. And I suppose there's very much that sense of wanting to hand over to the participant who's maybe felt disempowered, felt like they're powerless in their life, to have an experience where they're really interacting with it, and that they're bringing home insights or feelings that are really relevant to them. So yeah, I think, as opposed to traditional psychiatry, we're trying to step away from being the expert and just kind of provide that warm presence. You know, obviously having an understanding of someone's psychology helps us to, know when maybe we might need to move towards them a little bit more, or give them a little bit more support if they're struggling. But on the whole, we try to give them a wide berth and let them figure it out for themselves, because we know that's far more powerful than me telling someone what they should do with their lives.
And so you mentioned this kind of visualization of diving down into the ocean and uncovering these kinds of issues that might be the spiky oysters with the pearl inside. And I think Bill Richards of the Hopkins team also speaks about kind of going down to the basement of your mind. And I feel like, and the kind of cleaning it out. I feel like these analogies are really powerful, given that I think the experience really is one of descending into something seemingly kind of maybe potentially threatening or just unnerving. I think that's really interesting that you incorporate that explicitly. Do you feel like that helps people, or even helps you as a guide, to run through that process before the actual experience?
Well, I think it definitely gives a framework for the participant, because I suppose it's, going into your unconscious, into your intrapsychic world, and you really don't know what you're going to find there. But if you go there, a bit like the hero's journey with bravery, and you're on an adventure, then and curiosity, then whatever arises is all grist for the mill, and it's usually directly related to your intrapsychic world. So it kind of gives you the opportunities that you only get, I suppose, in dreams, like in Jungian analysis, to really go into your intrapsychic world. And usually what arises is something where there's a pain or there's a wound, and so it's kind of championing this idea of going towards your pain rather than resisting it. And we know that psychologically we go to great lengths to resist our pain, and we take antidepressants to mute our pain. So this model is about, in fact, you've got to feel it to heal it. You've got to go in and through. You've got to just go there and see what's happening, and that maybe it's not as scary as you imagine.
And actually, I think I heard Ros Watson in a lecture say that Bill Richards trained the therapists at Imperial. Is that right?
Well, we had a few training days with Bill, but for Psychedelic 2, so Ros created another kind of training workshop, and we did the holotropic breathwork as well as a way of, as a group, all getting into an altered state and knowing that was what that was like. So we've taken heavily from Bill Richards, but Ros has also created her own kind of therapy model and training, because she's incredibly industrious. Seems to write an awful lot.
Well, that's probably a good thing to talk about next, is her model of this accept, connect, embody, or ACE model, right? So so this seemed to kind of grow alongside the research, is that right? Kind of through qualitative interviews with participants and just getting a feel for a model of how this process works.
Yes. So Ros and I joined the Imperial research team at exactly the same time. In fact, we met each other at a pub. We were the first people, the early people, and we met first, and then we've been kind of going along with each other concurrently since. So Ros did the 6-month interviews with the participants from Psychedelic 1, and she found that the mechanisms of change that seemed to be really important were acceptance and connection. So it felt that people had a greater sense of acceptance towards themselves and others. And then this acceptance fostered a deeper sense of connection to themselves, to others, to a spiritual principle, to nature. And I think that, so those principles became kind of pretty crucial to Psychedelic 2. And then we were thinking about integration and embodiment. So embodiment became like the third principle. And we realized that, the psychedelic experience is very much an embodied experience too. It's taking you, from your mind and into your body. So the prep visualization kind of helps to foster that too. And, in terms of embedding the insights of the psychedelic experience, it's like you have to embody them and you have to embed them into your everyday kind of life. So embodiment. And often, with depression, we're disconnected from our bodies. So I think it's a natural progression. And what I really like about the therapy model is it's kind of open, and each process is a process that you never complete. You know, you're always working on greater acceptance, you're always working on greater connection and deeper embodiment. So it's just like some guides to think about how, you know, how connected am I to others, and thinking about depression. If nothing, you know, connection is the antidote. It's depression is very much a disconnected state, so fostering greater connection, you know, makes perfect sense, and then embodying that in whichever ways you can. So yeah, I think as mechanisms of change, I think they work very nicely together.
Right, and I think this idea of connection, would you say is it fairly common that instead of viewing depression as this kind of as a kind of maybe like a primary disorder, as the primary thing that's wrong with someone, do people tend to often find that perhaps there are traumas and things, and the depression is almost like a symptom that's secondary to emotional burdens they might be carrying, you know, like past trauma is a kind of mode of
Yes.
separation. You know, I feel like if we have
Yes.
these
Yes.
challenges, we close off from the world, and
Yes.
then depression
Yeah.
could maybe
Yeah.
be understood as a pain that's associated with a state of deep
Yes.
separation as a result of traumatic
Yeah.
experiences, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, I suppose we kind of, we become more fragmented, don't we? I suppose the
Mm-hmm.
trauma fragments different parts of ourselves, and I suppose that connection of those disparate parts of ourselves makes us more whole, and often for me, if the trauma is unconscious, it's really hard to process and to deal with, and you know, sometimes I think the psychedelics can go to those places because you can go to those depths and realize that there are parts of you that you have split off because they were too painful, and what it enables you to do is to go and access those parts, and in being with them, but this time feeling supported, like traditional therapy, you can start a process of healing. So yeah, I mean, to me, depression is feels really, yeah, it's about having fragmented and disconnected parts of yourself, and so fostering connection and becoming, accepting yourself more, and recognizing, I suppose, that you're not inherently broken. So many of our participants come out realizing that they're not broken, you know, and that's a huge revelation. And often through the experience of the psychedelics, they are able to have some space from the depression. They stop defining themselves in terms of the depression. They notice it's something that happens to them, and that they have some space to create a different relationship with it. And I think that space, rather than just say, I am my depression, I'm depressed, and defining yourself through your depression, it gives you that bit of space to say, okay, well, this is something that happens to me. What can I do? Or where can I create space in order to deal with it in a different way? And I think the psychedelic model or paradigm definitely creates a different way of processing, and gives you, you know, if you have that sense of we're all interconnected, we're all, you know, these mystical experiences, it's once you've felt that in a really embodied way, it's really hard to feel that I'm disconnected and alone in the world, because it doesn't compute anymore.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not that you can sustain that feeling of connection, but you have something to work towards, like, how do I foster deeper connection in my life, in my everyday life?
Right.
How can I feel more connected to others?
Yeah, I think that's a really striking link between the research that just kind of looks at the mystical experiences occasioned by psilocybin, and then the depression research, because as you say, I think the mystical experience is one of a perspective in which only connection really exists. It's a kind of one of saying that this idea that I am separate is another perspective, but it's not necessarily as true as the one where there's only a kind of process of interconnection. I feel like so yeah, I mean that's why I guess discovering what could be understood as spiritual truths can be seen as kind of healing, I guess, right? If you're living in a mode where
Sure.
you're deeply feeling separated from the world, whether it's from trauma or anything else. And then you mentioned this kind of fragmented aspect, which I feel like brings us back to the first part of the accept, connect, embody thing, the acceptance part. Would you say that someone with depression, are they kind of struggling more with struggling with themselves, you know, like parts of themselves they don't want to accept, you know, avoiding certain emotions, of kind of numbing, perhaps distracting, you know,
Yes.
constantly shifting
Yeah.
attention, rumination? Is that a way of understanding what's going on?
Yeah, I think you put it really well there. I have nothing to add.
Okay.
Yeah,
So you
yeah,
go from this kind of experiential avoidance to an integrated
yeah,
acceptance, right? And
yeah, yeah, for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like this is also kind of like something that Carl Jung wrote about a lot, right? Of this kind of integration of the shadow, like it's becoming whole
Yes,
instead of being
completely.
fragmented.
Yeah, yeah, completely. And I suppose Jungian theory is probably the closest we have to a psychotherapy for psychedelics, really, apart from maybe, I
Right.
suppose, the transpersonal archetypal stuff, which also fits quite well to the mystical experience. But I think, yeah, the idea of getting to know your shadow and accepting your shadow, and recognizing it's probably not as scary as you imagine it is. So it's kind of these parts, through shame or whatever experiences we've had in relational, often experiences we've had in our youth where we were told we were bad or wrong, and so we split them off and pushed them away because they made us feel really awful about ourselves, and it's kind of going to those places of shame that just feel awful, and looking at them, and were they really warranted? Are you that awful and bad? And it's through, I suppose, this process of integrating our shadow, like you say, that we become more whole.
And I saw you gave a great talk at Breaking Convention, this conference in London last year, on
Mm,
this idea of
mm,
two particular Jungian archetypes that are kind of useful in navigating
mm.
this process. Could you say something about that?
Yes. So after Psychedelic 1, myself and Roz kind of recognized that integration was going to be a key aspect of sustaining the benefits of the psychedelic experience, and that the trial was incredibly limited. I mean, also the Psychedelic 2, well, it was incredibly limited, but we had an aftercare person called Ashley Murphy Bina who gave hooked people up to different resources and did mindfulness of people. So she definitely created more of a container and a support for the participants of Psychedelic 2. So we created an integration group in the UK, and yeah, it became, well, it's clear that it was incredibly important for people to have a space to talk about their psychedelic experiences. And as a result of creating that group, along with my colleague Greg Donaldson, who studied sort of transpersonal psychosynthesis therapy, what became clear is that often what people were struggling with were the mystical element of the psychedelic experience, that sort of transpersonal element, and how to weave it into the everyday, which is really what integration is. So we would talk about the archetypes of the pragmatist and the mystic, and how this dance between them is a necessary dance for integration. And I think they just became sort of the archetypes that seemed to resonate with people in the group. When we talked about, we could see someone was like hung up. They wanted to go and live on an island and move away from the world, and live in a daydream, like a mystic. And you can completely understand that experience, but that it's not going to last long. So it's just about how can you take all this wonder and awe and whatever it was that the person experienced, and kind of honor it in a kind of ordinary everyday way. And I suppose that's where the importance of the pragmatist comes in. So it's this dance that we would use in our integration group to kind of help people understand the importance of both archetypes.
And do you see people kind of maybe kind of over-identifying with the pragmatist as well? Would that look like someone who just kind of rejects the experience and just says, oh, it was a kind of a strange drug experience, and might struggle in that direction instead of overly on the mystic side?
Not so often, actually, to be honest. No, yeah, I
It's
don't
more
know
about
that.
encouraging
Yeah,
people
most
to be
people
pragmatists.
would tend. Yeah, I think it's like we were trying to anchor and ground people,
Okay.
because people became more evangelical and they're mystical. Yeah, or I suppose there was this dissonance between this beautiful interconnected mystical experience that they may have had, and the kind of everyday reality being difficult, and real relationships being sticky and messy and not so straightforward. So for me, I suppose as a relational therapist, I'm very much talking about, well, how does this translate into your everyday relationships? Because that, to me, that's the indication of you really integrating stuff and improving your relationships in a very real, tangible way. But I think when people first discover psychedelics, they can just, it's the razzle dazzle of the mystical experience that beguiles them a little bit, or this idea of spiritual bypassing, where people just get hooked on these kind of transcendental states. But to me, that's experiential avoidance probably, and it's about how do you bring that into your everyday relationships, and how does that work in terms of, can you connect to people in a deeper way, can you be more honest, and so yeah, on the whole, normally we don't have a problem with people being too pragmatic.
Yeah, I guess
But,
the psilocybin will have
so
that
it's more,
effect
it's
on
more
people.
about, it's more, yeah, I mean, there might well be some, but they haven't really come to our groups as yet.
So this is the, I guess, the embody phase of the accept, connect, embody model. Would you say there's an equivalence between embodying the lessons and integration?
Oh, definitely, yes. I think embodiment is crucial in terms of in the experience as well. It can often be a guided session. It can often be about feeling in your body and becoming more embodied. And sometimes people have very body experiences. They may not have intellectual insights or visions or whatever. It may just be about, or they feel incredibly relaxed in their body, or it felt like it worked on a body level. So, and if we think of depression as being disembodied, because often again it's being up in the head. So kind of recreating this relationship with our body as a place that is full of information and data, and our emotions are, and our feelings are a navigation system. And if we're disconnected from them, then we're losing an awful lot of data about ourselves and what we care about. So this process of becoming more embodied, I think, is literally is part of the integration, but it's also, it's like our minds and our bodies need to be gelling and working together again to be more whole. And I think I think it is a crucial element of, and in traditional psychotherapy, I think the body has been kind of moved out of the room, and I think it needs to come back in. I think it's a really important part of us functioning in a more holistic way. So I think there are many elements in which embodiment is really important.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've referred twice now. We've referred to holotropic breathwork and transpersonal psychology, both of which are associated with Stan Grof, right? And the breathwork is a very kind of bodily, I guess is in that tradition of kind of psychosomatic therapy. And I feel like from the experiences people have, it seems like people can uncover almost kind of Freudian psychodynamic type, or just normal unconscious material, down to kind of Jungian kind of collective things, and then these mystical transpersonal ones and these bodily ones. Do you see those kinds of themes emerging a lot, or any other particular themes in people's experiences?
Sorry, like all of those themes?
Yeah, when in your work, what are the kind of common characteristics you might observe across people? Does that kind of cover it, those themes that I've mentioned?
Yes, I would say it would be largely psychodynamic, biographical, transpersonal, the mystical, body centered. I don't think I don't know that there are any other elements or aspects.
And I guess they kind of blur, right? Like emotional, like you could imagine biographical memories having huge emotional weight, which is a very bodily, if you're really feeling your emotion in your body, right? Then it's suddenly, do you follow that as biographical, emotional, or bodily, so it's not neat categories, I guess.
They are, no. And the music, I suppose the fact that it's guided by music, and music can bring you very much into your body as well. So that, I'm sure that's fostering a degree of embodiment through the playlist. So it's very much priming for you to go into your sadness, or to feel that bitter sweetness of sadness and joy. So that's another element of, but interestingly, our supervisor is also a holotropic breathwork facilitator. So I think we're very grateful that his, somatic awareness, and he's very much a follower of, he was a clinical psychologist, retired clinical psychologist, but has become a holotropic breathwork facilitator. So his, knowledge of the body and the importance of embodiment has really helped us as a team as well to, to not overlook its importance.
Right. And so you mentioned that people are they have headphones on listening to music, right? And they have eye shades on, and they're really kind of directed to go inwards.
Right.
And do you kind of explicitly direct them to move towards the uncomfortable aspects, so they don't just end up having a blissful experience and enjoying a kind of display of visual things, but instead are kind of actively moving towards the challenging material?
No. So yes, no, I suppose we don't. So unlike MDMA therapy, where you would be working directly, there'd be a lot more interaction with your therapist. I suppose this is more of an internal journey. So we very much let whatever arises arise, and yeah. So we don't direct in any way. We might just notice, say, in the latter half of the integration, if we felt that something quite crucial happened, maybe we will reflect back whether that hit home to the participant in any way. I mean, maybe it wasn't important for them, but it may have been something we noticed or observed, but very much kind of focusing on their meaning making and making sure that it's coming from them rather than from us, which, as a therapist is very hard, because we like to make meanings and make stories. And so, it's very much about controlling that impetus to help out too much.
Yeah. And so is it possible that, one participant might do, encounter kind of autobiographical material, emotional things, challenging kind of stuff that might look more like a kind of traditional psychotherapeutic material, and someone else maybe will just have a kind of blissful, interconnected, mystical experience? Does that kind of thing happen?
I don't know. I mean, it does happen, but then there might be little elements of biographical and mystical, and often it might be a biographical experience with emotional catharsis whamming into a mystical experience. So and there's the configurations or the way in which things happen are also different for everyone. So it can really vary, I think, in terms of people's experience. And I think maybe the fact that we don't interfere so much probably in a way kind of fosters more the sense of having a mystical or a deep interconnected experience, because it's very much, it's the person with the music, and as long as they feel safe and that they go, it's often I think we're there really. So if they start to feel resistance or they start to feel panicky, is just to reassure them that whatever's happening is absolutely fine and it's all good, and that eventually it will pass. So so just that warm presence, really.
Does it happen that sometimes people come back with no kind of perhaps insight or any kind of particular bit of some information that they can kind of accept about themselves, or does it happen, or is it seen as a negative thing if someone just says, I had a few hours relief from my depression, it was an incredible spiritual experience, and now I feel much better than I did before? Does that happen, and is that seen as kind of maybe missing the opportunity to get some insight into one's kind of unconscious processes?
Well, I think there are different types, so some people have transformative experiences, which are pretty much that. They have a mystical, emotional, cathartic experience or ego dissolution experience, and they can shift their depression for a considerably long time. And some people will have biographical experiences. And I think in the research, what we found is that often that the people who tend to have more mystical ego dissolution experiences tend to shift their depression for a lot longer. So I think in Psychedelic 1, 11 of the participants had a kind of a mystical type experience. I think it's this sense that it's an unfolding process and that you may not be able to make sense of it straight away as well. It's really important that we kind of encourage people not to try and concretize or fix meaning too soon, because there's this kind of neuroplasticity, this openness, the new novel connections are being made in the brain, and it's just kind of to stay with that expanded state, and to see what emerges. And then I suppose it's what we're then encouraging is what insights or what feelings or how can you honor this experience. So we try to encourage them to make small changes in whatever ways they can, whether it's doing meditation, doing yoga, walking in nature more, calling friends more. It's just that kind of trying to capitalize on that kind of psychological flexibility and that neuroplasticity. So yeah, I think, and the people who are kind of more conscientious in making those small changes, I think tend to shift the depression for a lot longer as well. So it's very much, I think it's very much an interactive process between the participant and their experience, and then what they do with it afterwards, which is why, again, the integration and the therapy is so important.
Yeah, so you in these trials, you've been doing these 6-month follow-ups, right? After the actual sessions, to see if people have kind of, I guess, if there's been remission in the depression or otherwise. And so, would you say there's a spectrum of people who stay kind of recovered from depression, and other people where it comes back, and that relates to the integration process?
Yes, yeah. I don't know that it always relates to the integration. Sometimes people. I haven't carried, I don't know, I think maybe Ashley's carrying the 6-month interviews, and we don't know what the results of them are, but I know on the first trial, so a few people, it's usually, it was 19, I think maybe 2 or 3 were depression free at 6 months. So it's, a small number that have this transformative experience where it's shifted, but I think it's kind of unrealistic to expect that one high dose psychedelic experience will transform someone's life. I think it may be a case of like 6 sessions over a year with therapy. Perhaps you could really do the work. But having said that, there are some people who have, incredibly transformative experiences. But on the whole, I think the depression comes back usually at around the 6-month mark. And then it's, what people, I think they've started a different healing process, a different journey. But unfortunately, because of the legality of psychedelics, it's kind of stopped. It's truncated. We can't continue to do the work. Maybe they could do holotropic breath work, or some people, I imagine, go to retreats in Holland and continue the work. But yeah, I suppose at the moment, what's difficult is that we can't give further sessions. So we've kind of started people off on this healing journey, and it's like, how do they continue it?
Yeah, that's a real shame. Hopefully that will change in
Yes,
years
hopefully.
coming. Yeah. I feel like something as well that is maybe hard to intervene in, but that could be a major factor in these changes not lasting as long as they might, is imagine if someone's living in a situation, perhaps the depression might be due to being in an emotionally abusive relationship or something like that. If they return to that environment, suddenly it's no surprise 6 months later they've been dragged back down into, and there's a real logic to it. It's the problem isn't with them. It's like it's arising out of the context of their life, right? So I guess that really, as you were saying, imagining a year of therapy with multiple sessions where people are really growing into a new way of being in the world, where it makes sense for them to not be depressed. I feel like that's probably crucial.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right that, and in a way, we don't have the structures or the frameworks to embed the the psychedelic experience in our society and culture at the moment. It's with indigenous tribes, the whole community were down with it. It was fine. You could have a psychedelic experience. It was a rite of passage. So with the stigma still attached, say if you come from a very ordinary psychedelic naive environment, to go back and not have anyone to talk to about this transformative mystical experience can be very alienating. So even though it may have given you that sense of deeper connection, if you don't have the support or people who are interested, in your experience, then it can just be something, I suppose, that gets kind of pushed down. So I think community-based experiences or group experiences will be kind of a crucial way forward, so that you will always have a group of people who've at least shared the experience with you, and that you can kind of check in with. And on Psychedelic too, because of COVID-19, we couldn't do the face-to-face integration groups. So for the people who'd had a high dose experience, we set up a weekly Zoom meeting, and it was incredible to watch everybody support each other and see them grow together. Just having that contact, you could just see how incredibly important that connection and contact, having a space to talk about that experience, and you know, people who understood depression. So in the end, it felt like, you know, we could sit back as facilitators and just watch them support each other and grow together. And I think that kind of model is ideally how it should be rolled out. I don't know how we do that. I suppose it's just more acceptance or more community-based versions of it, but to me it feels like that's another level of how we can embed the psychedelic experience in communities, and just seeing that in that Zoom group was really amazing, because I suppose in the integration group it was a mixture of participants and just other people, and they weren't necessarily depressed, but because all these people had this very shared experience, they'd all been on the trial, they were, yeah, it was just a wonder to behold how they all supported each other. So I think that feels like a really important learning. I mean, COVID-19 gave us that, but I think that would be really helpful thing to continue with future trials.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful point about the kind of group work. Like I personally can imagine over the kind of coming years and decades, if everything goes kind of optimally, that we may have to kind of re-envision how we deliver kind of healing to people, and instead of it being a case of delivering healing, maybe we do have community centers where, you know, you imagine using these things for personal growth and healing, you know, so someone who maybe isn't at high risk of, you know, when instead of talking about someone with like severe treatment-resistant depression who may have suicidality or something, if you're just someone who's struggling with mundane kind of emotional issues and unhappiness, I can imagine there being a place for, kind of very, I guess, non-hierarchical kind of group-based experiences and support and integration circles for people to be able to access this stuff. Can you imagine something like that? Kind of,
well, I think that would be well, I suppose maybe how I've thought about it is that, you know, thinking about a depressed participant or patient group, is that initially maybe they would start off with individual sessions and then they would graduate to group sessions. You know, part of their journey might be a few individual sessions and then moving to the group, because that, you know, that in itself creates deeper connection. So and of course it's more cost effective, and I really like the idea of it being within a community. In fact, you know, growing your own mushrooms and people going, you know, having their sabbaticals and like figuring stuff out and having that space to do that, whether they're or struggling with deeper mental health issues. But it's just it's putting those structures in place in a safe way, I suppose.
Right.
But it does feel that the group will be an important development or addition to the model.
I think that's a really perhaps exciting and striking thing of psilocybin as such a powerful medicine for these things is, as you say, it's incredibly cost effective. If you had, you know, it's a I guess a naturally occurring, you know, organism that can't be patented. So if, you know, this doesn't have to be a mental health care model where you have to have psychiatrists, you know, being involved, giving heavy like top-down instructions. You know, as you said, the experience itself tends to kind of have its own logic and unfold from within. And so it seems kind of fortunate that this potentially revolutionary way of treating people could be very widely accessible, in terms of, you know, that there not being kind of huge financial barriers to rolling out that kind of community healing model, I think.
Yeah, I think it would take a while, and we may have to go through a sort of medical model version of it before hopefully it transforms or transmutes into one. And I think even I think with healthy participants, maybe it's not so crucial that it's a psychiatrist or a therapist. I'm not sure, but with people who are really struggling with mental health issues, I think it's really important to have, you know, a therapist or someone with mental health training. Even though they're doing little, it's just being conscious of, you know, the warning signs of being able to manage people who really struggle psychologically. And I suppose there's that training, isn't there, that so even though that training and the security, I suppose, that it can offer people who really struggle.
Yeah. And so you've been running this integration group in London. Actually, perhaps we can kind of attempt to just say what integration is, because it's a word we've thrown around a bit, but we've not really said precisely what it is. It's quite hard to define, I guess.
It is quite hard. Yeah, I suppose. Well, I suppose it's the idea of, you know, the idea that we're kind of have fragmented aspects of ourselves, and how we become more whole. And it's, I was thinking about our psyches, it's thinking that, just due to our experience and traumas, and that we do have these fragmented aspects of ourselves, and that bringing them together, accepting them and working with them can create a more whole, well-adjusted individual. It's not the most eloquent version of integration, but it's
I guess
the one I'm running with at the moment.
And there's also, I guess, the idea of integrating lessons you've learned into your life, and maybe this is kind of embodying. If you've realized that you're disconnected from people, and then you're not actually calling people up on the phone more often, then you've not really integrated that lesson. I guess.
Completely.
And so what do these circles look like? Are they just open to the general community, or are they specifically for people who've been in the studies?
So participants from the study can come for free, but it's also open to the general community. So people who've been to, say, retreats in Amsterdam, or have found a way to have a guided session somehow illegally in the UK, will come. And we don't allow any more than 15 people. And we have we serve tea, we sit in a circle, we will do a meditation to help us arrive, and then we will so we find out how many people would like to talk. Usually it's about 5 or 6, which is good because we don't really have the time for everyone to talk, and then we kind of encourage people to just be open to each other's experience, and not trying to offer advice or fix it kind of solutions, just kind of in a way help create that liminal space of openness, so that the person can perhaps reconnect with their psychedelic experience. We encourage them to focus just on one experience, and we say to them, if you just want to be witness, that's absolutely fine, but if you want feedback from the group, then let us know. And then usually someone's experience will resonate with someone else, and so it goes that people, and I find what we find is that because of the nature of the psychedelic experience, the groups are incredibly powerful, and people go very deep very quickly, because they're going deep into their psyche, and then after the people have shared, we will just hold hands and maybe do 3 ohms and say goodbye. So that's very much. But obviously it's been happening on Zoom now, so that's quite different. Equally as interesting, but it feels a little less connected, I suppose, a bit more disembodied in the Zoom sphere.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I think this is, as you say, a kind of really important part of the healing process. I myself was on an ayahuasca retreat where there was a kind of a healing, a group share thing that happened daily, and that I was surprised that perhaps that was the most powerful part of the whole process of kind of being vulnerable and being heard, and seeing other people be vulnerable, and it just be okay. It's just that's not if that's not something you're doing in your daily life. It's a real It's a powerful space to be in. So yeah, I would definitely encourage people to not neglect this kind
not
of
to shirk the
aspect of
integration.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, because yeah, well, I mean, if we think that so many of our wounds are relational and usually related to shame, I think sharing and connection are the antidote to shame. So once you're able to be vulnerable and accepted by other people in what you think are your darkest, most awful moments, then shame no longer has its tendrils in you. It's no longer kind of inhibiting you in the same way. So that capacity to be vulnerable and open with others really is what fosters and deepens our connections and our relationships. So in a way, the integration group kind of models that. It kind of gives that sense of, wow, you can be this intimate and share yourself to this depth with a group of people you don't really know. So I think it's a good practice of what kind of relationships do you want in your life, and how
Right.
to move forward in ways of developing deeper intimacy and connection.
And so now that the Psilocybin 2 is wrapping up, what's the kind of future direction for these clinical trials?
Right. So at Imperial, I think they will be doing a trial on panorexia and one potentially on chronic pain. And I will actually be helping out on a DMT trial, which will be a longer fusion trial of DMT to see whether basically if you have a longer infusion, so a longer experience, will that increase the therapeutic benefits and potentials of DMT. So that's where I'm going to be working next. But Roz is kind of developing a clinic arm for the synthesis retreat so that they can in fact invite depressed participants to come and have a retreat experience with a very lengthy integration program that she's developing around that. So I may help out a little bit there, but COVID is kind of sending everything a bit haywire. So I may help out with a few of the retreats, but I've kind of signed up to do a year and a half on a DMT trial. So that's where I'm going to be heading. Yeah, so so lots still happening.
Yeah.
But yeah, I suppose really it's all just the push to reschedule, and so that this work can hopefully or people can start to access the treatment sooner rather than later.
Right. And can I ask how long the infusion is for the DMT?
I think it will be, because it's normally about 20 minutes to half. I think the peak is normally about 15 minutes, but I think it won't be probably more than 45 minutes. So
Okay.
I think the peak will probably be the same, but it will be a slower ascent and a slower descent.
That's interesting.
With the idea of hopefully because I participated on a DMT trial at Imperial, and it's incredibly quick, so you kind of get propelled into consciousness soup was the way I described it, and it's quite bedazzling. It's quite hard to work out where to look or what's going on or what's important. I mean, and I do remember more on the ascent that the things that I took back with me seem to be more on the ascent of the experience. So maybe elongating the ascent will mean that more you can bring more back. But we'll have to see. I suppose that's the point of seeing whether this is true or not, or whether people will just be like, oh, that was really intense, I don't know what to make of that.
I was going to say it's famously kind of overwhelming and intense experience, which I think is why the slow release DMT of ayahuasca is kind of maybe seen as a way to kind of do this more slowly. I wonder if that'd be interesting to see if we can kind of get new kinetics psychologically out of this from having the slow increase and slow decrease. Has there been much research looking at the kind of short periods of DMT therapeutically?
Well, no, I don't think there has really. So, I mean, it will be interesting to, I had a kind of phenomenological interview after my experience, which actually was incredibly useful because it did make me think about the experience in and I think it did help to kind of ground the experience and make me think about it in new ways. So yeah, it will be interesting to see, you know, with that kind of more of a therapeutic container around it, whether that will also help people, you know, find more use in it.
Right.
I suppose we won't really know until we've done it.
Can I ask if what the I guess the phenomenological character of it was for you? Because you know, for most people, I think it's this kind of wacky other world full of entities that you're interacting with. Was it that kind of experience?
It wasn't, yeah. So, I mean, it was incredibly busy. I remember a sense of, it felt like I dropped into consciousness soup, and that lots of people could drop into this consciousness soup, and it wasn't, the whole experience didn't feel like it configured around me, as in I was the center of the experience. And I went in with the intention of deepening my compassion towards depressed people, because I've never suffered from depression, and I knew that I was about to start the Psychedelic 2 trial. And I remember feeling really bamboozled and wilted, and it felt like, even though I was disembodied, that this presence lifted my head and said, well, you came here for a reason, like, pay attention. So even though I was disembodied, something lifted my head and encouraged me, some benign presence that I didn't see or have a sense of, to pay attention. And then this was kind of on the descent. I kind of noticed, you know, the kind of jolly rainbowness of what the experience had been, and then suddenly this vignette of a door. I'd been reading a Jeanette Winterson book, and she was very much a latch door, kid key, or whatever the phrase is, and there was a sense of a presence kind of sitting on a door, you know, sort of the neglected child whose parents are not really around. And I could feel the heaviness and the grayness of that experience. So it was interesting, because it was like this kind of, you know, this is what it's like when things feel really alive and full of zest, and the kind of heaviness and grayness of, so it felt like it gave me a little sense of, this is depression, this is not depression. And then as I came out, but remember feeling a real sense of awe. And I said to Chris Timmerman, who's Chilean, that I felt quite sheepish, and I really don't think he got it, because it's not really a Chilean turn of phrase. And you feel like a sheep, and I was like, kind of sheep, you know, awe. He's like, oh yeah, okay. So it was quite a humbling experience. And then I just had some strange synchronicities after it, which were a bit odd, to do with money. But as a consequence, in order to integrate that, I decided that I would pay my cosmic rent, which means that whenever I go out into London, I will have some change in my pocket, and I will pay my cosmic rent to the homeless. So I'll always try and give a few pounds to whoever's homeless. So that, I suppose, that felt like slightly my integration from that experience, or the one change that I made. But I do think, it did deliver in terms of helping me have a sense of how heavy and grey it is, you know, and how difficult it must be to be depressed.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. I wonder if having an intention really maybe primes you to have those kinds of those kinds of insights, because, you know, if you look at the Rick Strassman's work that kind of started the psychedelic renaissance, I guess that seemed to just be delivering it. People had these strange experiences, struggled to integrate them. You know, the case reports didn't seem to be full of kind of healing experiences or anything like that. It was just kind of mind-boggling, you know, kind of, and ontological shock. This idea that not really knowing which way is up in reality afterwards.
Yes. Yeah, maybe it did, because I didn't feel, I mean, it was, I mean, and I suppose the analogy I use, or my sense of it was almost as if I can imagine what it felt like being born. Like, you kind of came into the world, and it was just really intense and really full on, and you didn't know what to, almost like you were looking from the eyes of a baby, like you didn't know what to look at, and there was so much to see, and what should you focus on. That to me, it felt like that's probably what it was like when I was born. Not that I could categorically know, but it felt like it was probably similar to that. But yeah, maybe the intention and this benign hand going, oh, you wanted to get something out of this, why don't you? Okay.
Yeah. And so maybe something to end on would be, this may be a question for policymakers more than the researchers, but is there any sense of when psilocybin for depression might be actually prescribable?
Well, I know Ben Sessa always says 5 years, and he's really optimistic. But you know, maybe what was COVID-19 and the fact that there's a mental health impasse, and there's going to be a lot of people suffering from grief. That these, you know, hopefully there feels like there's a change happening. You know, I mean, there are places in America where psilocybin is becoming legal. I suppose it's just our current government not great. But yeah, I mean, I hope within 3 to 4 years, but sooner would be nice.
Yeah, yeah, not can't come soon enough, in
Uh,
my opinion.
yeah, exactly. I mean, as soon as possible. But yeah, I suppose I'm just trying to be realistic. But
Yeah,
who knows? It can all, yeah, it can all change quite dramatically. I think, yeah, there's so much potential there, and it seems a shame that we're not we're not just not using it right now.
right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your time.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to talk to you.